Okay, so welcome everybody to the Women in Leadership Foundation Difficult Conversations. Carrie and I are thrilled to be here today presenting to you, and we've had a lot of people register for this topic, and so it just tells us this is something, top of mind and kind of a hot topic. I think that a lot of people are curious about how to have difficult conversations, how to lead into them, and just gaining that confidence around being able to have those types of conversations. So my name is Heather Thompson, and I am executive leadership coach, and I live here in Sherwood Park, Alberta. I'm also the Alberta Women Chapter Chair for Women in Leadership, and I'm really about supporting and empowering people on their leadership journey. I'm also, along with Carrie, we're both co-facilitators of the Women in Leadership Authentic Leadership Development Program. So there's a new name change. So you're here for the groundbreaking news. And also the author of Mind the Gap Navigating, co-author of Mind the Gap Navigating Your Leadership Journey with Carrie. So I'll turn it over to Carrie to introduce herself.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Carrie Schwabius. I am in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I am the co-chair and actually founder of the Women in Leadership chapter in Saskatchewan. I am also an executive coach and consultant, and with Leader facilitate the Authentic Leadership Development Program for Women in Leadership Foundation. I'm kind of a leadership nerd. I love everything to do with leadership, and I'm constantly reading and learning and sharing what I've learned. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and so today's presentation is interactive. So, we're wanting you guys to participate. And so we're going to start off with this question. Have you ever had to have a difficult conversation? So, or Carrie and I, the only people that have had to do that. So type in the chat if you've had to have difficult conversations before.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, every day. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Ah.
Many.
Yeah.
Oh, almost daily. Oh my gosh, yes.
For sure.
Yes, you cannot avoid them.
Yeah, you can't avoid them, right? And they're coming. And so we know, though, as leaders, that having these difficult conversations can really be our Achilles heel. And they just did an article recently through the Harvard Business Review, and they talked about the study that showed 18% of top execs say holding others accountable is their greatest weakness and really struggled with having those difficult conversations. It also goes on to talk about share that poor performance consumes up to 70%, 17 of 70 is like, ooh, it's a big number, but 17% of a leader's job, which works out to really 1 day a week. So we have a poll here. And so we want to know, how do you feel about giving difficult conversations? So Carrie's going to pop that poll up, and we want to see, what are your thoughts around difficult conversations?
Okay, can you see it?
Yep.
Lovely. Oh, I think it's so fun to watch the results come in.
Yeah. Yeah. We've almost got everybody participating here.
Okay, I'm going to shut it down in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Here we go.
Yeah. So it looks like most people here are saying, I'm getting better at them, but I still find them hard to do, right? And so that seems to be, again, something that we have to do in our role as leaders. It's not the most comfortable thing that we have to do, but, with practice and learning to be more confident, we can have more effective conversations around that. So today I'm just going to share the agenda with you. So we're going to talk about what are difficult conversations, how to have them. We're going to share with you 6 steps that we've created the process that you can walk through to make sure that, you're prepared to have those conversations. We're going to give time at the end to reflect and learn. And we want you to think about, what's one thing that we've shared today that you're going to be able to take away with you and start to implement tomorrow. Okay, so we're going to ask you that at the end. So keep that top of mind.
All right. So difficult conversations are, no surprise, difficult. Why are they so difficult? Because we as human, we don't want to hurt people's feelings, right? We don't love conflict. It's not comfortable. We don't like to be criticized. And sometimes we just don't have the skills. We haven't practiced it a lot. We haven't been able to have a lot of difficult conversations. And so, we just really shy away from them because we're not confident. You're not alone. Lots of us avoid them, but they're difficult. Today we're going to talk about how to make them a little less difficult, how to give you some more confidence when you have those difficult conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens if you avoid those conversations. There were a few people in the poll who said, yeah, I avoid them at all cost. And I've done that in the past as well, because they suck. They're terrible, right? So what happens when you avoid those conversations? Well, initially, maybe nothing happens, right? That's easy to take. Nothing happens. Okay, good. But over time, you start to see a strain in the relationship. Issues are unresolved. And there's a lack of growth for people. And then if you put it off even longer, you start to build some resentment. There's a distance between you. Trust breaks down. Problems get worse. Repeated conflicts, lingering resentment, and then hindering personal and professional development, right? And the relationship stagnates as well as the productivity within a team. And the worst thing, I think, that can happen if you're in a leadership position and you're not having those difficult conversations is you become irrelevant as a leader. And to me, I think that's a really good reason to get some practice at having some of these conversations.
Yeah, so what I want you to think about is I want you to type into the chat, what do you think what does it look like for teams that actually can embrace difficult conversations? So I want you to type in the chat maybe some characteristics of teams that lean into having those difficult conversations. What would they look like for an outsider looking in? Yeah, trust, respect, overcome obstacles, safe space, culture of growth and development, another trust and growth, high performing, openness. I think that psychological safety, team grows and learns. Yeah, voices from all members. They're not afraid to speak up. Yeah, collaboration, growth. Yeah, so I think, it's important for us good listening. We're going to talk about that as well. And I think it's important for us to think about, like Carrie's identified what the problems could be and looking at like, what does it look like when teams can actually lean in and have those conversations? So some of the things that we came up with, and again, really similar to what was shared here when I asked that question, was really about teams that embrace difficult conversations really can enhance that trust and transparency piece. So being able to talk about things, share ideas, not worried about putting themselves out there. Better at problem solving, right? Improve problem solving. So again, they're not afraid to lean into those difficult conversations, get right down to the problem and start to create solution. There's also the opportunity there for holding people accountable. So when, we're having to talk to somebody and having that difficult conversation, giving them an opportunity to maybe change something that they're doing or for us to better understand, what's going on. And oftentimes I've seen when, we're talking about having these difficult conversations and we say, well, have you talked to that person? And people say, no, I haven't talked to them yet. And I think, how can you expect people to change if we're not holding people accountable and we're not leaning in and having those conversations and giving them an opportunity, to correct something or change something or help us to understand really what's going on. Also helps strengthen relationships because a lot of people typed in there about building that trust. And I think not just trust with the leader, but also trust within the team and allowing that to occur, authentically. It increases emotional intelligence. We could talk forever about that. Enhanced psychological safety, again, really being able to share things, even if the whole team doesn't agree, but really being able to lean in and have those kind of conversations. And again, they're just a great opportunity for people for learning and growth. So in the 6 steps that we come up with, and we're going to talk about these today, is like, how do you start to prepare for these difficult conversations? Because when I first started into leadership, I didn't really have a process or steps. And, I kind of had I approached it the way that I had seen other people approach it in the past. And so maybe in the beginning, if I look back and think, yeah, I've definitely grown and developed that skill, and to be able to be more confident and be able to be more empathetic and be able to be more authentic to myself, as I've moved through these steps. So the first step is like, how do you prepare? And we're going to go through these. Then we're going to look at, right time, right place. The third step is, setting the stage for the conversation. Fourth is really, when you're in it, it's that listening actively. Fifth is, how do I communicate clearly and constructively? And 6 is, how do I follow up and support? So those are the 6 steps towards difficult conversations. So the first step that we have is preparation. And I love this quote because it says, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, right? By Benjamin Franklin. And so how do we start to prepare for those difficult conversations, right? And so we can have difficult conversations around things like performance issues. Maybe we're having a conversation around constructive criticism. Maybe we're dealing with a conflict situation. So how do we start to prepare ourselves to have those difficult conversations? And what I think is important to realize is how you show up really matters, right? It matters how you present yourself and how you show up. And so what you need to consider in that preparation are things like, what am I hoping to achieve from this conversation and why am I having it? You need to be able to manage your emotions, right? And so be able to, how do you ground yourself before you have those conversations? I think you also need to acknowledge your biases, because sometimes when we're having these difficult conversations with members on our team, we could have biases, preconceived ideas, and notions, right? Or already thoughts about that person, right? And so how do we make sure that we're able to check ourselves and be able to think about, how can I practice empathy and really being able to put yourself in that other person's shoes? And I always think about this, Stephen Covey, beginning with the end in mind. So when I'm starting to prepare, I'm starting to think about those things.
Thanks, Heather. So I think one thing I want to just talk about here is, as a communications person, so I worked in communications for more than 20 years. And one of the things that we always thought about when we were tackling a new communications plan was, what do we want people to feel, think, or do when we've communicated what we're trying to communicate? And that sticks with me in leadership as well. So when you are preparing, think about, what do I want this person to think? How do I want them to feel? And then what do I want them to do when this conversation is over? And I think it's really important to balance that care for the person and the candor of sharing the information that you need to share. Because care demonstrates that you value the person, but having that difficult conversation and being open and honest with them shows that you value their potential. So really making sure you have that balance. I wanted to talk a little bit about Radical Candor, the book by Kim Scott. And she talks about, I really like this graphic because it really demonstrates the importance of the difficult conversations, and then also kind of lays out these 4 quadrants. So, manipulative insincerity, where we might be silent, or we might even, be overly complimentary with somebody. rather than honest. Or ruinous empathy, where we really care and we, we want the best for them, but we really can't push them to be better. We can't give them that feedback or be open and honest about, how their behaviors are impacting us. And that's no good for a relationship either. And then down on the right is this obnoxious aggression. So this is where you have no care and all candor, right? And so people don't react very well to that. So that's why I feel it's so important to balance that care with that candor. So what Kim talks about in this book is that upper right quadrant there, that radical candor, where you have that balance between really caring about the person and wanting their success, but then also challenging them to grow and to learn and to do better next time. It's funny, she shares a story in the book about her experience, and she worked for Sheryl Sandberg, and she had just done this presentation. She was really nervous about it, but it went really well, and she was really proud of it. And she and Sheryl were walking back to their offices, and Sheryl said, congratulations, that was a really great presentation. And then specifically listed, here are all the things that you did really well. And then she said, do you realize that you say a lot? I have a coach that can help you with that I would like to recommend if you're interested. So she showed that she cared. She gave her specific examples about, this is what went really well. And here's the little something that you could do differently that would make it even better. And then she actually gave her the tools to do it. Hey, I have a coach, go and work with that person. So challenging directly, but also demonstrating that care. And this is not, I've heard the feedback sandwich where it's positive, negative, positive. That's not effective. It gets lost. The feedback gets lost in that sandwich. So the next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to this preparation step is mindset and how we look at that conversation. And I think this is really important because if you think of the belief cycle, so what I believe influences what I think influences what I do, and then what I do impacts my results. So if I go in there and think, oh, I have to have this terrible conversation, I hate these conversations, I'm so bad at this, these are difficult, or this will be difficult, then guess what? It's going to be terrible. But if you take a different mindset and you go in and you say to yourself in that preparation, I really care about this person. I know that they have a lot of potential and I want to be the leader that helps them to achieve that potential. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to have this conversation. And that changes how you show up for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carrie. And I think so step 2 is really about like time and place. And so what you need to think about is how relevant and urgent is it for me to have that conversation? So if something's happened and you're like, you know what, I need to talk with that person tomorrow, or I need to talk to that person end of day. You need to figure out, what is the relevancy and urgency of having that conversation and the impact. You also want to think about like respecting other people's schedule, right? And so if you're setting up a meeting and you want to be having this difficult conversation, I mean, we work with people all over the world. So we have clients in the States, we have clients in Canada. Some of them are leading teams that are in, Canada and the States and in India. And you have to think about like, what's the other person's schedule? So, what's coming up for us here in Alberta on Monday is Family Day. So, if I'm going to be scheduling a meeting, I'm not going to be scheduling it on, on Family Day because people are not working that day, right? So we want to be respectful of people and also, what their schedule is. I want you to think about the emotional atmosphere. So if something's happened and you're pretty heated or the other person's pretty heated, then it's probably a good thing to step back and take a pause and wait till that emotions are stable. And whether it's end of day, whether it's the next day, or it could be, 2 days, again, depending on relevancy and urgency, you need to think about managing emotions. Anytime I've had to have a difficult conversation where people are heated, it can sometimes go south very quickly. And, we have to be able to then take that pause and step back and notice, I can see you're really emotional, or I'm feeling emotional, and being able to think, I need to think we need to take a pause. One of the things I was saying to Carrie earlier before he got on the call was I said, oh my gosh, you know what would be a great picture in here? I don't know if anybody watched the Super Bowl. My husband's a big, loves sports. So then I love sports because I have to watch the sports with him. But on the football game, I don't know if you saw like Travis Kelce. I don't know if it's Kelce or Kelsey. And he was like in Coach Reed's face. And Coach Reed was awesome, just like stoic, super calm, and then, Travis came back after what I read and apologized, but really being able to manage those emotions, didn't react, was not reactive, and really able to kind of, things could have turned south really quickly if the coach reacted in such a negative way. And then the fourth thing I want you to think about again is that being mindful of cultural differences. So again, depending on like who's on your team, where are you working, where are they? A lot of people are working remotely in Canada, States, and a lot of our leaders are coaching teams all over and into India and all over really. So thinking about, what are some of those cultural differences that I need to be aware of as the leader when I'm going into having those difficult conversations. The next thing is to think about is what's the right environment, right? So are you having a Zoom call, right? Are you, a lot of people now are working where they work, the hybrid situation where they're working from home and then they're going in and working in a community environment, community office area. So where are you going to be able to have that conversation? Are you able to book a room? Are you able to create some, privacy to have those conversations, and making sure like, and I've seen where, something's come up in a meeting and then people want to have that difficult conversation. Something's kind of, again, gone south. It's not the right time. It's not the right environment. So you need to make sure that you are in an environment where you make sure that the other person has that psychological safety, they feel safe, and that you can have that difficult conversation and be respectful of other people.
Yeah, and I'll just add here, just even having it not in your office is a little safer, right? Because people have this perception of, oh, I'm going to the boss's office, right? So just thinking about that environment and the context of that for people.
Yeah. And the third step is that setting the stage. So, we talked about it earlier, but it's really around how do we establish that trust and rapport, and how we communicate, having that open communication and the ability to collaborate. How we start the conversation is really going to matter. Making sure that people know, like, what's the purpose of this meeting? I've had people say, hey, can I meet with you? And then you worry. You're like, I don't know, what are we meeting about? Or, is something wrong? Or, and they don't clarify the purpose or agenda. So please, like, take the time to clearly communicate what's the reason that you're having the conversation, and, what are the areas that you want to talk about. And then managing expectations. So looking at what's the scope of that conversation, and then going into knowing, you're going into that phase of, I'm solution focused. We're going to foster and collaborate solutions together. And so, um, we want to make sure that we've set the stage properly for that meeting as well, which impacts mindset. It impacts how people show up. It impacts stories people tell themselves before they get into that conversation with you. It allows people to manage their emotions, ground themselves. It's a really important part of that conversation is setting the stage.
And the fourth step in this process is about listening. And we all think that we're pretty good listeners. But the truth is we're not as good as we could be. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about these things. So being fully present, demonstrating those active listening skills, and then really listening to understand. When we talk, a lot of us want to speak to be understood, and it takes a lot more effort to listen, to understand. So what do we have to do to be fully present? This is not rocket science, and you probably know all of this stuff, but just a reminder. I know my phone is sitting here right beside my screen, and I've got it here so I can keep an eye on the time. But as things pop up on the screen, I see them, they distract me, they take my attention away. So turn your phone on do not disturb, or flip it over, or put it out of sight. Take your eyes off anything in front of you that's going to take your attention away from the person that you're talking to. That's why if you talk about, place and time, it's really great to go somewhere that's not your office, where you're not going to have as many distractions. And then physically turn your body to face them and make eye contact. And that body language is demonstrating that you care, that this is important, and that what you have to say is really important. So take that time, be fully present, do not rush these conversations. So how do we listen to understand? A lot of these things you've heard before, right? Be fully present, summarize what you hear, paraphrase, say things like, so if I heard you correctly, or let me see if I understand what you're saying. And ask a lot of questions, right? That's a really great sign that you're listening when somebody's talking. If you're asking questions, because it shows that you're fully engaged and you want to know more. And watch your body language. Are you facing them? Are you in tune? Are you giving faces, reactions? Sometimes my husband will tell me like, oh, what's that look for? And I'm like, oh, I don't even realize I've got a look on my face, right? So be aware of that stuff. Watch their body language. Are they slumped over? Are they not comfortable? Are they open? And show empathy, right? I hear what you're saying. That's really difficult. Demonstrate that empathy. Withhold judgment. This is so hard for people to do, is withhold judgment, because we're hard on ourselves, right? And if we're hard on ourselves, well, we can't be the only people who have faults. So we must be hard on others as well. And that makes us feel a little better. But that judge gets in the way. It gets in the way of relationships. So rather than judgment, use curiosity, ask more questions. And then this last one here I want to point out is really important, because listening might be all somebody needs. They just need to get it out. Okay. Clearly communicate. So most of you will have heard of Brené Brown, right? Shame and vulnerability. She's such a great speaker. If you haven't seen her, go look her up on YouTube. And she says, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So be clear about what you're saying. Don't dance around it, right? Have you ever gotten some feedback from a boss who's kind of hemming and hawing and, kind of dancing around a little bit? Be straightforward. When you are clear, it is kind, because people really understand, oh, okay, that's what she's saying. Heather, you want to talk about the coin model?
Yeah, so I think before I get into the coin model, I just want to stop here and pause a moment. And I want to ask people, what do you think is at stake when we don't have those difficult conversations? I want you to just type in the chat. We've talked a lot about, the already into the 4 steps. But I want you to really think about what is at stake when we don't have these difficult conversations.
Oh, I just want to read this in the chat here. So Tara says clear communication is so important with managing and leading those who are neurodivergent
Yeah.
because direct language is often very appreciative. Thank you, Tara. Very good point.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, nothing changes when we don't have those difficult conversations. Performance can decline. I think frustration builds and grows resentment. Yeah, we have staff turnover.
And staff turnover is expensive.
Yeah, team's reputation can tarnish team's reputation, right? If people are like, well, we don't ever address anything, people just let that go on, right? Yeah, not sure where the boundary should be. Always better to be candid versus candid. Yeah. Culture, like poor culture, performance on whole team behaviors. Yeah, it becomes difficult to grow. Status quo and also embarrassment if somebody didn't realize they were doing poorly. Yeah, and no one said anything. And what it reminds me of is, kind of this analogy. So you think about, you're wanting to learn how to play tennis. So you go and you hire yourself a tennis instructor, and he knows that, your swing's off or your arm's a little bit low, but he never says anything, right? And you continue to do the same old, and it's like you never get better. So when you think about having those difficult conversations and leaning into it from a place of, here's an opportunity to really allow people to learn and grow and stretch themselves. And Brene Brown says that clear is kind. And, have you ever had a conversation where you're like, I didn't even realize, like, I had no idea, right? Nobody said anything. And so why are we avoiding and holding back on having these difficult conversations? Because they're difficult and people sometimes would rather avoid than hurt people's feelings, right? I don't want to say that because I don't want to hurt their feelings. I really like them, and then it really can hold people back in their performance because they don't know. They keep doing what they did and nobody has said anything. So one of the things you want to talk about here is just the coin model, and it's really a tool, and there's a lot of tools out there about how to give feedback. And so the coin model works kind of in this model where it's like context, observation, like what are we observing? What's the impact? What are next steps? And then I add an S to this. So it becomes coins model, and it's about staying, like how can I still stay focused or stay connected? So I have an example for you. I thought I'm just going to put up an example. We don't have time to run a demo, but we're going to do this example. So if you want to go to next slide, Carrie. And I have a scenario here, so you can read it on here, but so here's an example. So I noticed that during our last presentation, one of my staff members was really disengaged and distracted and was on their phone quite often. And so that bothered me. So I wanted to have this conversation, have this difficult conversation. So I start off with my context, so really being clear when it was, when I observed this. So I said, hey, Sarah, I want to talk to you about something, from our last client presentation. So I'm going to share what I've observed. So I noticed during the meeting that you seemed a bit distracted, checking your phone frequently, and you weren't really engaged in the discussion. And then I'll share the impact. So it gave the impression that maybe you weren't fully invested in the meeting. Sorry, my thing is stuck here. Sorry. I'm like, my mouse has gone wild. You weren't fully invested in the meeting, which could affect how the client views our team. And personally, it did make me feel a bit uneasy. And I thought it might have had a similar impact on others in the room. And then next step, I noticed it's really not like you to be so distracted. I wanted to check to see if everything's all right. And I'm going to wait and pause here. So I've shared the context, what I've observed, what I felt was the impact, and I'm going to wait for Sarah to respond, right? So she could tell me, you know what, something like, yeah, I am really distracted today. My mom is in the hospital going through surgery. I'm checking my phone. My brother's going to text me. And so I just wanted to be present for that, right? Or maybe, maybe she tells me something else. And she said, I didn't even notice I was doing that. And so, then I might say to her, well, let's brainstorm some strategies here so that we can help you stay focused and be present. So what do you think might help you to become more engaged in the meetings? Right. And so again, depending on, and you can run this anyway, but just to give you an idea what it looks like, And then my stay, this is, I think, really important. And I want to say to her, I really wanted to bring this up because I care about your well-being and the team's success. So I'm here to listen or offer any assistance you might need. Like reach out to me if you want to talk about this further, or if there's anything else on your mind. Let's work together. So here's an example of having a difficult conversation, and you can put it in the context of how you would have that difficult conversation. So it gives you a very simple framework, but it's a framework where you need to become comfortable, and going through the framework yourself and thinking about, what would be some scenarios that I would be, wanting to address, and how could I use this model or similar model. But the big point here is making sure you want to know what's going on for them, right? Like, tell me more. I want to know more. How can I support you? And making sure that you are, opening up that opportunity there for extra dialogue. Okay, next slide. So the other thing that you want to talk about too is using I statements, like I noticed. Now, sometimes people will lead in like, well, why were you on your phone? Or, something like that. And it's really important to recognize that when we start to use why, it comes from a place of judgment. And so when we're having difficult conversations, we want to be mindful we're not coming from a place of judgment. We're coming from a place of curiosity and support and understanding, right? And so things like, I'm committed to resolving this issue together, or I'm struggling with whatever and I want to discuss it with you, or I feel frustrated every time we have a meeting, you disrupt me, right? Or interrupt me during the meeting. So instead of saying like, why are you doing that? It's more reframing it into the I statements. Again, you have to be specific and concrete. Don't beat around the bush because people might not understand what you're saying. So just be specific. Stay focused on the task at hand. So don't let it get into something else. Just stay focused on what you're talking about. You want to be mindful of language, and you want to invite dialogue and collaboration. And I see a question here. And what if the other person is closed off? And the other party is closed off and is not receptive? Then I'd have that conversation with them. And then I'd say, I need you to think about it and I'm going to chat with you tomorrow. Right? Because we're not going to let that behavior go. And then we talked about what happens if we don't address that behavior, right? And so when we're not addressing, we're not addressing those kind of behaviors, other people are watching as well. And so we want to make sure that we need to understand, what's going on, right? And that I'm here to support you, but, that behavior is not appropriate for the meeting. And so, I wanted to understand you a bit better. Right. And so, but we're not going to let that behavior continue just because they decide they're not want to talk about it, or they're not really receptive, because it's not appropriate business behavior, right, to be doing that. So
The other thing
not letting that stuff go. Okay.
Yeah, one thing I'll add, Heather, is to consider that if they're not willing to participate in that conversation, then there might be some difficulty in that relationship. And you might need to work on building that trust before you can have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to admit that, I have a role in this, and, this person doesn't want to have this conversation or engage with me because the relationship's just not there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Carrie. And then again, managing emotions, right? Yours and theirs. So not being uncomfortable if it becomes heated, or, to be able to pause and step back and say, I think we need some time. I think we need to take some time, and, being able to stay calm and focused. So I'm curious about you guys that are on the line here. What do you do to ground yourself before you go into that difficult conversation? What are the tools and strategies that you would use to, manage those emotions before you go into those conversations? Deep breathing. Yeah. Deep breathing exercise. Yeah. Yeah. Having that plan creates that sense of calm. Deep breaths, smudging and affirmations. Yeah. Yeah. My computer's going wild, like jumping all over. I fully admit to myself what I need in advance to prepare and also admit that to the participant. Yeah, I love it. Thanks. Yeah, yeah. And watching our tone, our body language, right? And just really being mindful. Yeah, and I like that reminder about why you're doing it. Check on work schedule to make sure there's time afterwards. Yeah, making sure you give yourself time. There's someone said, I love the smudging. Yeah, it's really grounding. Yeah, those are really great ways to help prepare ourselves and know I'm going to prepare myself and being intentional so I can go into that meeting and show up really as my best self. Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about conflict management because sometimes these difficult conversations get into that conflict kind of zone or area. And so just to give you some idea of some of the conflict management styles that can show up in the workplaces. So on the left here, competing, where, somebody wins and somebody loses. So you may get what you want, but the other person doesn't. For example, if you're talking about as a leader, you say, well, this is what I want you to do. I don't care whether or not you want to do it, but you're gonna do it. That's a win-lose. Another one is the compromising. So that's where, you both really want something, but you give up a little bit to meet in the middle. And, sometimes you have to do this in relationships for sure, but it's not the ideal outcome, right? Because nobody gets what they want. Another one is avoiding. So we talked about this. You avoid the conversation, everybody loses. You cannot make things better. You cannot grow as a person. They can't grow as a person if you don't actually go and have that conversation. Accommodating. So this is one person loses, probably you, while the other person wins. So you just kind of give up, let them do what they want to do, so that you make them happy all the time. But again, what happens is that you don't have a productive relationship, and the outcomes that you need from your people and from your team aren't going to be accomplished. So what you really want to walk away with is the win-win solution, right? That's where the listening skills come in so handy. Working together to figure out, okay, what's going to make everybody happy? How do we solve this together? I'm here to solve it with you. So not, here's the problem, fix it and walk away, but actually having that conversation and collaborating and coming up with that win-win solution. So that's really where you want to get to. And then the last step, follow up and provide support. This is so important because sometimes you have that difficult conversation and you walk away and you never speak of it again. That's a part of the avoidance. So you want to make sure that at the end of that conversation, everybody's on the same page. Okay. Okay. So as I understand it, this is what we agreed on. You're going to do this. I'm going to do this. Summarize that conversation. Make sure everybody has got the same message before you leave. Because sometimes you can have a conversation and you think you understand and you walk away and then you're like, yeah, I don't know. So make sure that you recap that conversation, that you confirm that you're in agreement at the end of the conversation, and then check in. Hey, we talked about this. Have you done anything? I don't know why that slide advanced on me, but here we go. And then offer encouragement, right? You're doing great. I've noticed that you're making an effort here. And then for your own learning and development, take some time to think about, okay, how did that go? Right? Because what most of you said at the beginning here was that, yeah, I have difficult conversations, but they're still uncomfortable. They're still hard. And, they're going to be hard. They're difficult conversations. So how do we get better? We get better by looking at how things went. So what went well? What could have gone better? What did I do well? And what would I do differently next time? And that doesn't have to take a long time, but just taking that time to reflect. And I did want to talk about, Susan Scott wrote this book, Fierce Conversations, again, about having difficult conversations, although she doesn't like to call them difficult. She likes to call them fierce conversations, because they are so important. They take a lot of courage. But she in this book talks about your emotional wake. And this is about, at the beginning when I talked about how do you want people to feel, what do you want them to think, or what do you want them to do? So feel, think, do when you're done this conversation. Think about that emotional wake. Have you ever had the boss who comes in and drops a feedback bomb and then storms away and then leaves you with all kinds of questions and emotions? So just be aware of the impact that those conversations might have on people. So here's a good time to stop and see if we've got any questions.
I think we can take a few questions. Put us in the hot spot.
Yeah, you can come right off the mic or you can put them in the chat. So I also wanted to acknowledge, somebody brought up smudging, and I realized that we did not do a land acknowledgement, which is something that's really important to the Women in Leadership Foundation. And yeah, I totally forgot to put that in. So my apologies, and please have some grace with me. I am not perfect. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay, here's a good question. Well, they're all good questions, but how do you approach a conversation that you have to have with someone that you don't know well?
Good question. I think that I think it's the same way. I think if you're talking about what is the impact, like what are the specific behaviors, what is the impact, and then what is the plan going forward? These are all still good tools. And really taking the time to sit down at the beginning and take a few minutes to kind of make a connection, right? Just want to start cold.
And then another question is, any strategies on having these kinds of difficult conversations when trust has not yet been established?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that question. I think these difficult conversations are a huge opportunity to start building that trust. Right? So, just starting it off. Look, hey, I don't know you that well. I've been your boss for I don't know, a week. Sorry, I am getting a lot of feedback here. So if somebody could just mute themselves. Yeah, so telling them, hey, this is how I want to show up as your leader. I want to give you feedback that helps you to learn and grow, and I'm going to be really honest with you, and we can talk about things. I'm here to listen. So excellent opportunity when you're just starting to build trust, to build that trust.
Yeah.
And Tara says, ADHD coach and helping leaders support employees who are neurodivergent. Common is shutdown. When they shut down and go silent. Ooh. Well, Tara, you're an ADHD coach. What advice do you have?
And Tara is the expert. Not to put you on the spot, Tara.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think we probably see this in one way or another with who we support, right? They're going to display all different forms. Um, this is a really realistic one that I think that we do have to be aware of, because depending on the person's history with feedback in general,
Mm.
Let's say if they were young and they were diagnosed with ADHD and told to, I don't know, stop moving or sit still, it can really translate back into the workplace. So I was curious if either of you have experienced this or other leaders on the call. But in my case, how I would handle this one is really recognizing, using your standard coaching language of like, what's coming up for you?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a better time that we can talk? But know that we have to. So what conditions need to exist for us to have this conversation would be my recommendation. But I'm guessing I'm not the first on this call, or even yourself when you get feedback. So just curious about other thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Tara, those are great points. And I think, yeah, I think the big point is you're going to need to have that conversation. And it's going to be, it's about how do you set the stage for that conversation, right? In order for the people to feel comfortable, at least to show up in their best self. And I think you also made a good point about when we think about, there's sometimes history around having those difficult conversations or feedback. And we'll ask people, even when you say the word feedback, what comes up for you? And a lot of people are like, they have this kind of gut wrenching, have had this experience, right? Of, when people are delivering feedback or having these difficult conversations and they don't go through, they don't have a system set up, they don't really think big picture, right? And so, I think that's why Carrie and I developed those 6 steps to be able to help people go through that process and really think more of a holistic, right? And slow things down a bit, making sure that you are really clear, about what you want to accomplish and what does success look like at the end of that conversation. And Carrie talked about it earlier about how do you want to make people feel like at the end, do we want people to feel bad? Well, no, right? So how can we use this as a learning and growing opportunity? And so how do we set the stage for that? So,
So
and
we
I
still
think
have
we're
some,
almost out of time.
yeah,
So
we have lots more questions. So what we'll do is we'll wrap things up here, but Heather and I will stay on. And so if you would like to stay and talk about it some more, we'll wrap up the recording, and then we welcome you to stay. We'll give you a few more minutes.
yeah. Okay, so today we just, again, kind of touched on the tip of the iceberg here, gave you the 6 steps that we have developed for having difficult conversations. And so we created this toolkit, and it's on our website if you want to go check it out. And really what it has is a roadmap to difficult conversations. There's a checklist in there about how to prepare. There's each of the steps that we talked about are broken down even more detail with these actionable steps. And we call it a toolkit because in each step that we have the 6 steps, there's 5 or 6 other, like 5 or 6 actions or behaviors to do. Plus we've given you actions to do that. So if that's something you're interested in and wanting to learn more, it's over 50 pages. It's got some really great stuff in there, and being able to have that at your fingertips. So our website is that www.lumalead.ca. So that is that. Now, what's coming up here for women in leadership? So we have lots of cool stuff happening. So on February 21st, we have a virtual presentation by the Will Victoria chapter. It's how to use AI to land your next job. So that's coming up February 21st. Another event coming up is, and this one's coming out of
Saskatchewan
chapter.
Yeah. So
What I
we
need
have
from insight and experience is the leadership panel. So they are talking about what they need from us as leaders, what I need from you. So insight and experience from a young panel. March 20th is going to be a career development webinar hosted by the Alberta chapter, and it's a fireside chat with Karen Ziegler, and it's called Designing Your Career Transition. So that you can register for that. I also wanted to share some exciting news for Will Alberta chapter. And Anna's on the call, I think. But we're launching our we're launching our podcast, and we've done the trailer. So Anna, if you're still on the call, can you tell me if it's on Spotify? Because I tried to find it today. Is she still on the call? It's going, well, I'm not sure if she's still on the call, but it's on Spotify, and we're really excited. We're going to be showcasing women leaders in Alberta. And we're super excited about that. It's going to be a monthly podcast, and it's called Lead Beyond Today, Women in Leadership Alberta. So super excited. The other thing I will share too about the Alberta chapter is we do have now a Women in Leadership Alberta chapter LinkedIn account. So if you're on LinkedIn, that's another place where we're going to be showcasing and promoting women in leadership, like for Alberta specifically. And so we'll be sharing, any of the Will events coming up. We have our National Day coming up, a big event in Calgary. May 29th will be coming up. And so we're going to be showcasing all of that. So if you are living in Alberta and you want to join that group, you just search up the Women in Leadership LinkedIn. It's live now. And it will have lots of really cool stuff that is happening all across Will, not just Alberta, but yeah.
Yeah, and then the last minute before we wrap it up, I want to tell you about the Leadership Development Program, the Women in Leadership Foundation's Authentic Leadership Development Program. So this one's starting in early April, and we spend 12 weeks together, and we go through all kinds of topics. We have excellent discussions. We do an emotional intelligence assessment. It is a fantastic program, and we've had some really great feedback. So, and the great news is that you can get a grant, or your employer can get a grant to pay for most of the cost. So, really fabulous program. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And as I said, I'm going to stop the recording, but if anybody wants to stick around and ask some more questions or have some more conversation, please do that.